Everybody else is wiped out. That your deposit is gone, not just frozen, but gone. They gave them what they call a receivership certificate. So here's like an illiquid IOU. And you say, well, what's that worth? And the answer is, we don't know. We have to sell assets, and then we'll pay off creditors, including yourselves, and you'll get something on your receivership certificate. It's like, yeah, is it 10 cents on the dollar, 90 cents on the dollar? No one knows. I mean, you can guess, but they don't know until they sell the assets. And having gone through this with the Resolution Trust Corporation in the early 90s, that can take 6 months, a year. It actually took, I think RTC did a good job, but that took 2 years from kind of 90 to 92 to clean that up. So you actually don't know. Meanwhile, who's got the receivership certificate, who used to be a depositor? All these startups we talked about. Well, I don't care if you had 25 employees and $2 million in working capital. You got a payroll. You got to pay the rent, pay the employees, pay the vendors, pay the developers, coders, et cetera. And they couldn't because their money was gone. So now they were just going to sequentially and very rapidly fail. They were going to, file for bankruptcy or close their doors because they literally couldn't meet payroll. And this is where the White House got involved, because then they're like, all these techies, all these, then you have tech startups, we talked about that, but who owned the tech startups? Well, this is where you get into the Bill Ackmans and the, Peter Thiels and Larry Fink. You get into all these big players who own all these little startups, Kleiner Perkins, Google, whatever. Well, who are they? They're very heavy Democratic donors. And what were these startups doing? Well, everyone thinks, I must be working on a new app. That's not true. A lot of them were climate-related, sustainable resource startups. They were working on the Green New Deal. And by the way, it's not exactly a viable business model, except if you look at the Inflation Reduction Act that Nancy Pelosi pushed through last August 2022, that was about 800 billion, a little bit more, maybe 900 billion. But that was called the Inflation Reduction Act, which is nonsense. That was the Green New Deal. That was the Green New Deal that AOC wanted from the start, and not all the money, but well over $200 billion was available for rebates, tax refunds, tax credits, et cetera, for people doing work in so-called sustainable resources, and many of them were. Now, we don't have 5 hours to talk about why the Green New Deal is the Green New Scam. That's a separate topic, but there's no doubt that the White House favored it and the Democrats favored it. So not only do you have Democratic donors, but the clients of Silicon Valley Bank were working on projects that are completely favored by elites, Democrats and Republicans. And a lot of their business models were based on getting these tax credits. So all of a sudden, you were not just blowing up a bank and the tech startups, you were blowing up a lot of initiative in the climate change arena, which again, I have a low view of that, but doesn't matter. The White House thinks it's great. So the ripple effects of this went on and on. There were something like 500 Israeli startups that would have been potentially put out of business. There were several hundred UK startups that petitioned the Exchequer, to get a rescue of the UK branch of Silicon Valley Bank, Chancellor of the Exchequer. So this thing was all of a sudden rippling all over the world. There were a lot of elite interests that were threatened. Sunday night at 6:15, the Fed, the FDIC, and it came out with a press release. They said, "Just kidding. The deposits are good. It's all good. We're going to guarantee unlimited." So now you're talking, it's not 250,000, it's 5 billion in some cases, or $2 billion in other cases. And they said yes. And so it was a 180-degree turn from what the FDIC said on Friday. It was like, the deposits are dead. It's like Dracula back from the grave. The deposits are alive as of Sunday night. And not only that, but the Fed proceeded to guarantee every deposit and every bank in the entire U.S. banking system. Here we're talking, $6 or $7 trillion of assets. And the way they did it was a lot of other banks, big ones and small ones, at least the big ones had good risk management, but a lot of small and medium-sized banks, they had the same problem Silicon Valley Bank had. Maybe the depositors weren't walking out the door, or maybe they weren't funding tech startups, but they had underwater bonds and overnight deposits and were facing the same thing. So the Fed said, okay, all you banks, if you send us your bonds, we'll give you cash. Okay, that's just a normal discount operation, but we'll give you cash equivalent to the par value. So again, remember the market value is like 80 cents on the dollar, but the Fed says we'll give you 100 cents on the dollar. So now you not only get to you ship your bonds to the Fed, they give you not 100%, which is like low collateral, but they give you 120%. So the banks are shipping in bonds that are worth 80 cents on the dollar. Why wouldn't you do that? I'm like, hey, Fed, if you want to give me a low interest rate bridge loan with 80% down, I'll take all you got. So now the banks are going to do that. And by the way, there's no, because it's structured kind of like a repurchase agreement, there's no sale. So they don't have to market to market. If you sold it to a third party, a dealer, you'd have to take the loss. But now they don't have to take the loss. So they're shipping in billions, potentially $1 trillion or more of these bonds. They're not getting 80, 90 cents on the dollar, which is what they're worth. They're getting 100 cents on the dollar, which was the original purchase price. They don't have to take the loss, and they're getting cash. Why wouldn't you do that all day long? So in effect, not only did the FDIC do a 180 between Friday night and Sunday night, but they bailed out the entire banking system to the tune of trillions of dollars. They just blew up the $250,000 limit. Forget that. I mean, I know what the statute says, but they threw that out the window. And the moral hazard, the economic consequences, the repercussions of this are kind of unimaginable. I mean, I can sketch them, I can talk about them, but this is, to hear Johnny Ellis say it's not a bailout. Are you kidding me? This is the biggest bailout in history. And I negotiated the LTCM bailout. I lived through that. That was $1 trillion of derivatives. But through 2008, 2020, the pandemic, I go back to 1994, the Mexican tequila crisis. I've lived through all of these and been more or less directly involved in all of them. And this is orders of magnitude greater in terms of what's being bailed out. Everybody kept their jobs, kept their bonuses, kept their stock. It all went back up again and all done with taxpayer money. So the taxpayers are like, wait a second, I lost my job or my business failed or, my cousin's out of work, whatever. But you took my tax dollars and bailed out Jamie Dimon, John Mack, and, the heads of Goldman and Citi and all the rest. So there was enormous political fallout from that. So the G20 was like, well, what do we do about that? There will always be another failure. And of course, they're right. So in Brisbane, they switched. They said, no more bailouts. From now on, we're going to have bail-ins. And what's the difference? Bailout is when you use taxpayer money and you bail out the depositors and the stockholders. A bail-in is when you turn to the bank and say, no, we're going to fill the hole in your balance sheet with depositor money. The depositor is at risk. We'll pay the insurance amount. It's 250,000 US, 100,000 euros in Europe. So we'll pay that, but that's it. And we are not bailing out any depositors or note holders or anybody else. We're going to haircut them until the hole in the balance sheet is filled. And then if there's anything left, yeah, you can have what's left, but everything else is at risk. We're not going to the taxpayers. We're turning to your depositors, and they're going to suffer and they're going to pay the price. And that was the bail-in rule. Well, it turns out, and that was 10 years ago, 9 years ago, there were no major bank failures between 2014 and last week. Little ones, but nothing systemic. So they came up with this new bail-in philosophy in 2014, but it had never been tested. It had never been used. This was the first time that a government agency, in this case the FDIC, said, "Yeah, bail-in is the new law of the land, and we're gonna whack the depositors to make up for the losses." Well, that lasted exactly 48 hours till Sunday night. So here you have a 9-year rule. Oh, we're no more bailouts. Boom! Within 48 hours, they flip and they do the biggest bailout in history. So they have no credibility. The FDIC fund is going to be seriously depleted. The idea that the taxpayers don't have to pay is nonsense. Why? Because you're going to deplete, since you took away the $250,000 ceiling on deposits, you're going to deplete the FDIC fund, the insurance fund, to pay off all these claims to, Roku and Box and all these people. So how are you going to replenish the fund? Well, they're going to increase the insurance premiums on the banks. Okay, well, the banks are going to pay that, But where are they going to get reimbursed? Well, they're going to charge the customers fees, or they're going to pay you less interest. In other words, it comes out of the pockets of everyday Americans, no matter what you do. You can launder through the FDIC and the bank insurance premiums, but at the end of the day, the banks are going to charge the customers, and so you're paying for it at the end of the day.